And then also, what is the most economical choice for Los Alamos County? So those are some of the things that the feasibility study will be looking at. And then with those results, we'll bring it back to the county council, and they'll decide which food composting program they want to pursue. Also, we're working on implementing a food waste prevention campaign and promoting backyard composting. So the little picture here is one of my favorite because it shows 40% of all the food produced in the United States is either thrown away, it's never eaten. So that's just a good statistic. That's how much waste we're throwing away, food waste. So food waste prevention education campaign. Reducing food waste is the third most impactful way to reduce waste, feed people, and impact climate change. So as I mentioned, 40% of all the food in the US is thrown away. And that's 17% of all LA County trash is food. So we're working on conducting a food waste prevention campaign, and you'll be seeing a lot more materials coming out of the county on trying to teach people how to store food properly, and just give people tips about expiration dates and different things like that. So this is an example of one of the food waste prevention campaign posters that's coming out of Natural Resource Defense Council's Save the Food campaign. So trashing one egg wastes 55 gallons of water. So not only does throwing away food waste food, but it wastes resources. So all of the energy and water and land that went into growing that food is then basically wasted. So we did join Save the Food campaign. And this effort is being led by the Environmental Sustainability Board and by the Zero Waste Los Alamos team. So if you're interested in joining us, please feel free to contact me. As I mentioned, we'll be conducting a community-wide advocacy campaign to raise awareness of food waste and educate residents about ways to save money and reduce wasted food. So the economic value is, they say on average, each household is wasting about $1,500 each year on food waste. So that means you're buying food, not eating it, and it's just going to waste. So we'll be working really hard on outreaching to our community and to our businesses. In the interim, we're also going to be working on promoting backyard composting. So Peak and the county are working together on a grant application to purchase backyard composting bins and kitchen containers to help residents divert food waste and backyard compost. So we'll be working on a whole education campaign for that as a means to divert food waste. So with that, I'll stand for questions unless you want to move to the next speaker.
We haven't had any questions put in quite yet. If anybody has a question they want to submit real quick, they can. Otherwise, we can move on to our next presenter. Oh, I have a question right here. Why does the county not compost the food themselves?
Well, we want to compost the food waste. That's why we're doing the feasibility study to see what is the best method for us to use to compost food waste.
All right, and then one more question for now. Is there any way to get a backyard compost bin from the county?
Yes, so that was my second. We're working with Peak on a grant application to buy backyard composting bins, and also the county council did allocate funds to buy more backyard composting bins. So you should be seeing those probably around August, September, October timeframe.
Perfect. Thanks you so much, Angelica. So now we're going to move on to our next presenter, Elchin, I'm sorry. If you would like to start sharing your screen with us, now would be great. Here we are. Elchin is an environmental scientist and anaerobic digestion enthusiast. He has been using anaerobic digester / compost for more than 2 years, converting organic waste to cooking gas. He likes green color and everything green, and is a huge fan of a circular economy. He will be discussing waste to energy. So Elkin, go ahead and lead the way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley. I would like to, first of all, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to give this talk. So I'm going to talk today about anaerobic digestion or no oxygen composting. So you can guess that anaerobic stands for no oxygen. It means that in opposed to the backyard composting, we are doing that when the decomposition is happening and the oxygen participates in that decomposition. In the case of anaerobic, there's no oxygen involved, and that means that it happens in water. Okay. So Angelica gave a nice segue to my talk, and I'll just briefly give so the same introduction that you already heard. Quickly run through it. Won't take much time, I promise. So if we looking at the global picture, we can see that the food waste by itself can be a third country, because the total amount of the global food waste and the carbon emitted as a result of that food waste in the atmosphere is 4.4 gigatons per year, which is right after China and United States, which are the two biggest greenhouse gas emitters in the world. So that said, zooming it to United States, Angelica already said that 40% of our food in the United States is wasted. And if we're going to convert that to per family, and in this case, it's a family of 4. So roughly we're wasting about $1,500 per year on a food that we're not eating, throwing away, or buying, and all kinds of things, or just it sits in our fridge and expires. Anyhow, that's the amount. And again, this is the rough amount. Every family is individual. So zooming it to Los Alamos, again, I'm going to reiterate what Angelica said. This amazing group of people called Zero Waste, that turns out that I'm part of that group too, collected, but I wasn't involved in this research that Angelica described. But you can see that according to this research, we have 70% of our trash can is a food waste. So that's the question that I started asking myself 3 to 4 years ago, and thinking, what I can do, how I can utilize that energy, because that's basically a free energy that we're wasting every time, and as well as wasting our own money. And I've been researching, and there's multiple solutions, but one of the solutions that I found was this company. It's called the Home Biogas. So it's they produce this so-called digester, which is affordable, useful, and super easy, and at the same time, a very genius idea. So what this composter / digester do, it basically converts food waste to cooking gas and fertilizer. And fertilizing can be utilized in our backyard. If we're doing gardening, then that's like high nutrient filled organic fertilizer, readily available to use. And on the other hand, it's pretty much no waste on organic. Everything that's kids didn't eat, every cooking trash or whatever, that should end up in the trash can end up in there. And it can take meat, it can take bones, it can take pretty much anything. So the idea of how exactly it's working, it's right here, right? So it's a tank full with water, and then we put our waste into that water, and there is a bacteria that lives in that water. And that bacteria is similar to bacteria that lives in our stomach, right? So when we eat food, first we chew it, then it goes to our stomach, and then there's a bacteria that start processing our food, and some of it gets to the energy and gives us energy, some of it releases as a solid waste, and some of it releases as gas. So the idea here is fairly similar. You put some waste into your tank, then bacteria starts composting or decomposing that food, but because there is no oxygen involved, the gas that's released, it's the methane, and methane, we know it's a cooking gas. So the compartment 2 is the compartment filled with water, but then, we trap that gas in the compartment number 3. The excess of water comes out as liquid fertilizer and ready to use. And then, if we hook the hose to our gas compartment, then we can use it for cooking. And the cool thing that, it doesn't attract any wild animals, which we know that most of our trash cans do. And yeah, myself, I've been sort of very pumped about this technology. And I was like, why don't you give a try and try to use it? So that's what I did. But, it really depends on the conditions, right? So there's a little smell that comes with the system, but other than that, it doesn't smell as much, or at all, I should say, and depends how you're going to utilize it. But in ideal conditions, you want to be somewhere that has a wide open space. For example, the space that I'm showing, it's one of the systems that I put behind the Earthship community or at the farm. So it's ideal if you have horses or stables or cow manure is perfect. But nevertheless, I was brave enough and put one in my backyard. And back then I was living in duplex. Now I live in duplex too. But anyhow, my neighbors, I think, were very polite people. They didn't complain. But on the other side, I let them into digester as well. So it was well enough to serving to families. And here on the photo, you see that the fertilizer that comes out of the digester. And then, this is how you feed it. So you basically convert your any sort of kitchen trash, scrapes, waste, whatever, to cooking gas, which is pretty cool. And I know that it's not allowed to show video. I hope that this video is going to work just to demonstrate how exactly it works and the fact that it's real. And here is when I was boiling corn. Oops. Let's see. There you go. See, it's good enough for boiling water. The gas itself, it's up to 2 hours. You can cook on it. So I even started my backyard grill. No matches involved. And then you guys didn't see the fire, so I want you to see the flame. Sorry, here's the flame. Okay. All right. So with that, thanks so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can always email me at elgin.jaffer@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Elgin, for that great presentation. Now we are going to be moving on to our final presenter for the evening before the live Q&A. This last presenter is Tiffany. Tiffany Pagoda runs Zia Waste with the mission to promote education around waste reduction and sustainability. She is also a member of the International Worm Farming Alliance. She will be discussing vermiculture, composing with worms. All right, Tiffany, if you're ready, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Excuse me. Once again, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to be talking to you about vermiculture. Vermi is a prefix that is Latin that means worm. So vermiculture is worm culture, and that encompasses composting with worms, which is vermicomposting, as well as harvesting vermicastings, which is the worm's byproduct, also known as worm feces. And it also includes raising and breeding worms. So this picture right here on the right, this would be vermicompost, which means it has vermicastings in it, as well as other organic material that may not have gone through the composting process or passed through a worm yet. And if you see these little dots right there, those are actually worm cocoons. Worms, they look like eggs, but worms are born from cocoons, and there's typically 3 to 5 worms in each cocoon. So I apologize. There was going to be a third presentation right before mine that went a little bit more into general composting. So I'll try to cover the best I can here. This is a comparison between vermicomposting and the typical composting that you might do in your backyard, which is hot composting. So hot composting is just like it sounds, a hot process, also known as a thermophilic process, and it typically takes 6 to 9 months to get a product that you can actually use. This chart down here, this graph comes from Rhonda Sherman at North Carolina State University. She is the authority on vermicomposting. She literally wrote the book. It's called the Worm Farmer's Handbook. She came up with this chart that shows the difference between a mesophilic process and a thermophilic process. So typical compost starts around here around 20 degrees Celsius. All of the fungus starts taking over, the pile heats up. There is a heating stage where all of the magic of the compost happens. The organic material is broken down. Then it goes into a cooling stage, and then back down, it goes into a curing stage, and then back to the mesophilic stage. Vermicomposting stays at the mesophilic stage the entire time. The worm's gut is such that it removes pathogens naturally, and that makes the process a lot smaller. Something I should note is that seeds typically do not get removed like pathogens do when it comes to the vermicomposting process. So I would not suggest adding any weed seeds to your vermicompost because you probably will get some seeds. I do see like volunteer tomato plants quite often if I don't cure my vermicompost, but for me, that's not a problem. Another difference between vermicomposting and regular composting is there is no turning required. In a typical compost bin, you need to go out and turn your pile and water it down every 5 to 10 days, depending on your atmosphere environment. With vermicomposting, the worms do all the work, so there is no turning. The value of vermicompost is about 2 to 3 times as much as typical compost. This is straight from Reunity Resources website. They are out of Santa Fe. They sell both premium vermicompost as well as another compost, and their prices are double for the vermicompost. And I'll show you why in the benefits section. Also, vermicompost takes a lot more water, moisture than regular compost. A regular compost pile, you want to use about 40% moisture. Vermicomposting, you need about double that. And the reason is because worms breathe through their skin. And in order to do that, they need to stay moist. If they dry up, they will stop breathing. Vermicomposting can be done inside or outside the home, which is great if you live in an apartment. An indoor worm farm could be anything from a 30-gallon storage bin, which is considered a traditional worm bin. You just drill holes in the lid. And then when it comes to harvesting the vermicast, there is a horizontal migration system. Flow-through worm bin, which is a picture that I have here to the left. This is my favorite indoor-outdoor bin. It's called the Urban Worm Bag. I am an affiliate of this company, and I have some contact information at the end. So this bag is great because you load all of your compost, your food scraps, your bedding, your worms, everything in the top. And when you're ready to harvest the vermicast, there is a pocket here on the bottom, and it opens up, and all you need to do is stick a bucket or some kind of tote down there to collect it. The worms naturally stay on the surface, so there's very little sorting. So that's my personal favorite. Indoor worm farms, you can also do a stack tray system that would take into account a vertical migration with the worms, where they would migrate up. Breeding trays are typically for larger scale breeders. You can do vermicomposting outside in a variety of ways that I have listed here. My personal favorite is to put the worms directly into your raised garden bed. This way the worms can spread their vermicast around all of your plants, and there's no harvesting that's required. Some considerations that you want to take into account if you're going to have an outdoor worm farm is the temperature. In the summer, you want to make sure that it stays nice and moist, and in the winter, you will want to cover your bin or mulch it. I like to use a combination of fall leaves and some old carpet for my outdoor bins, and that seems to work well. Worms typically like the temperature to be between 55 and 75 degrees. That's when they're the most productive, but they can sustain temperatures anywhere from 30 degrees up to 90 degrees. And so even if the outside temperature is a little bit above or below that, they will bury into the ground to get to the temperature they want to go. As long as there is enough moisture and a food source, they will basically stay where you put them. They won't migrate away in the off season. So here's some benefits of the vermicast. So I talked about the pest and pathogen suppression a little bit, increased water retention, promotion of microbes, root development, decreased transplant shock, faster growth. This is a great image, again, from Rhonda Sherman over at North Carolina State University. What this shows is one turnip grown just by regular potting soil means, one grown with a 10% mix of vermicompost and the potting soil, and one with the 20% vermicompost and potting soil. And so what's interesting here is if you look at the root development in the 10%, I mean, it's just as significant in the 20%. So this is still quite a bit bigger than this one that had no vermicompost. But what was really interesting about this study is that there was no significant increase found in plants that had more than 20% vermicompost added. So that's important. A little bit goes a long way. You never want to use more than 20% because you're not going to get any added benefit. So I get asked quite a bit if you can just go out in your yard and dig up some worms and throw them in a worm farm and start composting. The short answer is no, although you might get lucky. There are over 9,000 species of earthworms, and only 4 are considered to be good composters. My personal favorite are the red wigglers. There are also European night crawlers African night crawlers, and Indian blue worms. What makes the worms considered a good composter is that they only eat decaying matter. They're non-invasive. They won't take over living plants. They also live on soil surface. They don't burrow down into the ground and disappear. They prefer compost environment to soil. So they like to eat the microbes and bacteria that grow on decaying material more than super dense soil. And they also eat and reproduce quickly. Red wigglers will typically double their population every 90 days as long as they're given space to do so. So that's pretty fast. So what do the worms eat? So this is basically the typical stuff that you can compost in a hot compost pile, cold compost pile, or vermicompost pile. You want to avoid any meat, cheese, oil, anything that's stinky. Fruit and veggie waste is the best. Starchy materials can be added. Eggshells are great. You do want to crush them before you add them in because they take a long time to break down. Used coffee grounds as well as their filters. You'd never want to add fresh coffee grounds because they're too acidic, so make sure they're used coffee grounds. I don't know who would waste coffee, but I do get that question a lot. Tea bags, you want to remove the staple and the paper that's attached to the tea bag. Otherwise, those are fine. So typically with composting, you have what we consider green material, which is a nitrogen source, and brown material, which is considered a carbon source. So in this case, food waste is your nitrogen, that's your green. The bedding is the brown material or the carbon. It's called bedding and vermicomposting because not only does it aid in the composting process, the worms actually use the bedding as a home and they lay their eggs in the bedding. Typically, you want to use twice as much brown material or bedding as food waste. And you can use a combination of these items, shredded cardboard, newspaper, aged manure, coconut coir, and dry leaves. The reason you want to use aged manure is you don't want it to heat up. If it heats up, it will kill your worms. So how much do they eat? So under ideal circumstances, red wigglers can eat up to half their body weight a day, but typically it's closer to 25 to 30% of their body weight. So 1 pound of worms could consume up to a 1/4 pound of food scraps per day. Now, the reason that those numbers don't seem to make sense is because you need to keep in mind the bedding. You want to use twice as much brown material as you do the food waste, the nitrogen material. So when you take that into account, 1 pound ends up going down to a 1/4 pound of food scraps a day. The biggest mistake that people typically make when starting out a worm farm is overfeeding the worms. Usually the process starts pretty slow. It takes a little while to get enough bacteria and microbes built up in the system where the composting process is really active. So what I suggest is to put food in there, put your bedding, and then check. And once 80% of the food is gone, not so much the bedding, but the food, you can go ahead and add more. And again, when starting out, add bedding every single time that you feed. Once you get an older system or you get more accustomed to it, you might be able to change those ratios a little bit. All right, so these are some experts and resources. I do run Zia Waste, but I've actually started a new career and venture. So I just run the Facebook page right now. I have shut down my website, but these individuals are part of the International Worm Farming Alliance with me. Rhonda Sherman has a great website. Like I mentioned before, she wrote the Worm Farmers Handbook. She also has a school curriculum that you can download on this website. that is called Worms Can Recycle Your Garbage. And that is a great resource for schools and different communities to use. Steve Churchill is the owner and maker of the Urban Worm Company and the Urban Worm Bag. He runs a really great blog that has tons of information and videos on it. And Tom Huffman is the owner of the Texas Worm Farm. If you wanted to purchase composting worms, he sells all 4 species that I had mentioned before, the reds, the blues, the European, and the African night crawlers, and he will ship them directly to your house. He has guaranteed shipping, and he is very prudent and diligent and makes sure that you get live worms. So he's a great resource. And yeah, I think that's it for me, unless you got questions.
Thank you, Tiffany. We do have quite a few questions for everybody, so we're going to go ahead and start our live Q&A. So if our other presenters would like to start sharing their videos, I can make sure you guys are unmuted and start reading off some questions. Our first question is, if I have never composted before, where/how is the best way for me to get started?
So I would go personally to this website, ilsr.org. It's the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They put on a webinar last week, and they already have it up and listed, and it covers everything. So there's tons of information there in the webinar, and then they also have resources and downloads there too. So that's where I'd personally start.
Great. All right. So we're going to try to jump around to questions sent in at different times to make sure that we are able to answer questions from all of our presenters. I believe this is directed at Angelica. What is the proposed timeline for the feasibility study?
The proposed timeline, so we're drafting the RFP now, and it should be, hopefully, if all goes well, it'll be out on the streets by, I would say, no later than June, July timeframe. And then we'll probably give them, 6 to 9 months to complete the research.
All right, great. This next question, I believe, is directed at Elchin. Can the digester take grease and cooking oil?
It can, but if it's on a plate and leftovers, then it's fine. But if it's too much of that, then it's not a good idea. As well as, for example, if it's citrus, right? If it's just one lime or, half or a little bit of orange, that's fine. But if it's a bag of oranges, because you can imagine those oranges are acidic and they not good for the bacteria because which is basically adding acid. And yeah, you can guess if they're a small amount, it's fine. If it's more than that, then probably not a good idea to put it in, as well as with grease and oil.
Great. This next question is for Tiffany. Can you just take worms and put them in a compost bin, or do you need to buy a special bin?
So most compost bins you can, but there is an exception. I would not put worms in a tumbler style bin that you actively turn the worms in. That would probably kill them. And then if you have an all black, like the plastic all black bins that go outside, that might get too hot for them. You might be able to work around it with some considerations. I know people that live in really, really hot climates like Yuma that have outdoor compost bins. And what they do is they freeze water bottles and every day go out there and put the frozen water bottles in their compost bins to keep it full. So it's possible.
Perfect. All right. And then just a general question for everyone. Do you have any tips on dealing with rodents in outdoor compost bins? I generate a gallon or 2 of compost a week and cannot easily do it in batches to slow the compost that does not really get to the correct temperature. Is there anything I can add to deter rodents?
So there's a few things. You want to make sure you're adding a lot more brown material than green material. That will cut down on the smells that attract the rodents. You could look into getting diatomaceous earth and sprinkling it on your compost pile. That keeps most insects away. Some rodents, smaller ones like mice, I don't know about bigger ones. And other than that, I would say you need to probably enclose your bin if you're still having problems after trying those two.
Perfect. All right. So back to Angelica. You may have answered this already, but how soon will the compost study begin?
So I anticipate that it'll start by around August timeframe, by the time we solicit for contractors and then select a contractor and issue a contract with them. I imagine August, September timeframe. So
perfect. And then also Angelica, do you know if anything will be done to include the apartment complexes in town?
So that'll be part of the study on how we're going to collect food waste from either businesses or residents or multifamily homes, such as apartments. So that'll be part of the study on how we're going to do that.
Great. Thank you. Elchin, I have a question for you. How do you pressurize the gas for use? Could I take gas camping with me to use?
So the pressure on the gas compartment created by little sandbags that's equally distributed along the gas compartment. And that's what creates the pressure. So if you want to utilize that gas and put it in a gallons or somewhere, I wouldn't suggest to do that. I mean, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it. Hypothetically, you could do that. You can buy some sort of a bag, inflatable bag, and fill it with your produced from anaerobic digestion biogas. And if you can somehow store it and close it, and then when you're going out, but it's not going to be, I mean, it depends what you want to do, right? So like if you want to like cook for a couple hours, then it won't last so long. And then you need a big bag. But anyhow, I wouldn't recommend to do that. But yes, hypothetically, you could do that. And even not hypothetically, you could do that. I don't know if I'd answered the question, but.
Sounds perfect. Thank you. Tiffany, you may have answered this one. Can I add worms to an outdoor compost bin? I believe you answered that already.
Yes, but you can't get it up to the same high temperatures that you typically would do with a hot compost bin. So what you want to do is make sure that your compost stays under 3 foot by 3 foot, because once you reach those dimensions, the inside of it is going to start heating up real fast. And once it gets over 90 degrees, you'll start killing the worms. In the hot compost process, you have to get up to 160 degrees before you start killing any kind of like weed seeds.
Perfect. And then also for Tiffany, could I simply put worms where I plant my plants and make sure to water often? Will I have the same results?
As long as there's a food source for the worms. So like in my house plants, I have worms, but I don't clean up the dead leaves so that they have something to constantly be feeding on. If there's just soil and water for them to eat, they will eventually die off.
Thank you. All right, so just a general question. Is there a reason to not use a composter bought at any local stores? If I don't use a composter, how should I collect the compost in my backyard? Could I use a pit, a wire cage? And if so, how do I keep animals out?
So yes, a pit or a cage would be the way to keep the animals out. So usually what happens, any of the compost bins that you can buy commercially will work. Each has their own problems and, good things too, obviously. I personally prefer, if you're going to do hot composting without worms, do a pellet compost bin, which is just 4 pellets screwed together. That gives you about the right dimensions to get that 3 foot by 3 foot that I was talking about. You can secure the outside of pellet with chicken wire. You can put a lid on it to keep animals out. Otherwise, a container with a lid can go outside too for the worms.
Perfect. Thank you. Back to Angelica. I'm all about avoiding food waste and composting, but why do we send the trash to RR? Is there something to do with permitting?
RR meaning Rio Rancho, I'm assuming. So Rio Rancho is the nearest landfill that will accept our trash.
Perfect. Short and simple. I love it. Thank you very much. Our next question is for Elgin. Can you store the gas, or do you need to use it as generated?
You can totally store it. You can go for vacation for 2 weeks, and it will slowly be accumulating and getting up to the some pressure. But once it exceeds that pressure, it's going to release it on its own. So the system is smart enough to do that, even though it's not high tech. Well, it's some sort of high tech, but not really like, sensors and computers on it. So yeah, it will release the excess of gas so that to prevent, the gas chamber from tearing and exploding and stuff like that. You can leave for as many days you want and come back and start using gas immediately.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, back to Tiffany. Where can I buy these worms for my composting?
So I would suggest buying them from Texas Worm Farm. My friend Tom owns it. He's out in Austin, Texas, and he will ship the worms to you overnight, packed in peat moss that will ensure that they get delivered alive to you. And he sells all 4 types of composting worms.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Another general question. Would LAC consider partnering with individuals that have a little land to do a local food waste composting? I probably have enough space to compost for 10 families or so, but I'd need some help getting the infrastructure set up. So now reading that through, that may be more directed at Angelica, but anybody who has a good answer is
That's a really good question. So like more of a community-based composting. Maybe that's something we'll look at part of the scope of work for the RFP.
Another for Angelica. Are these the systems the county will be purchasing, and what will be the cost to residents?
So the county council has given us, they're really in favor of backyard composting in the interim of this study being conducted. So we haven't selected the type of backyard composting bin we're going to purchase at this time, but we will be looking at that soon.
Thank you very much. All right. Elchin, what factors contribute to how often your device needs to be cleaned out?
It doesn't need to be cleaned out. Once you start it, the bacteria will do its work, and it's basically gonna eat everything that you've given to it. Of course, that's actually a really good question. They're going to be a sediment, right? So they're going to be some sediment, but typically that sediment, it's going to take years to occur. And roughly it's less than an inch. It's probably half an inch per year of the sediment that will be occurring at the bottom of the digester. So you can use it literally for 10 years and never clean it. Or if you want to clean it at some point you see that your efficiency of gas production is dropping down, then it's fairly easy to clean it. Probably the good idea is to clean it every 5 years, but you can do it 10 years. The cleaning process is actually straightforward.
Another question for Tiffany. Have you kept black soldier fly larvae with red wigglers?
I have not personally. I do know of some people that raise them independently, but not in the same bin. Typically, you'll have one bin for the black fly larva and one for the worms.
Thank you so much. Another general question, is the 40% of food waste for an average household? Does that include restaurants and unsold food at stores as well?
So I'll answer that. The 40%, yes, it is farm to table in the sense it's everything that's left behind at the farms. It's not sold at the grocery stores that you take home and eat or don't eat at homes. It's kind of like the full picture of food waste. And it does include residential and business.
Elgin, what connects the stove to the biogas machine? Do you need pipes or something that you can get the gas from the biogas machine to the stove?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the whole system comes in a box, and everything is included in the box. The box includes these 2 compartments. It's super easy to install. And then it includes hoses and stove. So literally, it's like IKEA, right? So you go to IKEA, you buy I don't know, a tape and assemble it. Similar idea here. You buy it, it comes in a box, you open the box, you read the instruction, assemble it, super easy, it takes less than 2 hours to assemble the whole system. And then you connect your gas compartment to your stove through the hose.
All right. So let's see what another question we have. I believe we have one for Tiffany. Can pine needles be used for worm bedding / brown material?
No, almost everything that is organic can be composted. So there is a yes to every answer. But I do not recommend pine needles because they take so long to break down in a compost pile. They're better used as mulch. So I would save them and use them in the wintertime to cover up your compost pile, protect it from the elements.
Thank you so much. Angelica, will the county be providing guidance for DIY options for composting?
There is actually a really nice pamphlet that's put together by New Mexico Environment Department that is on the county's environmental services webpage today. And it has instructions on how to build, I think, straw bale, compost bins, and then the pellets like Tiffany recommended earlier, and also vermicomposting. So there's a really nice compost brochure on the website.
Great. Thank you so much. Elchin, it looks like you're still around. You willing to answer a question or two?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So our first question is, how much does this system cost?
I haven't checked the last price. If you Google home biogas, you can go directly to their website. Last time when I checked, it was $720. Not including shipping.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tiffany, can I just use a bucket filled with 30% brown and a little green materials?
You can, but I would recommend getting a lid for your bucket and drilling holes in it just to make sure that the worms don't escape on you. And you also don't want to fill the entire bucket. You want to think about vermicomposting more like lasagna. So you're going to add some bedding, some food, some bedding, your worms, let them eat the food, and then you're going to add more food, more bedding on top. So when you're starting out a new bin, you never want to fill it more than probably a quarter of the way to a third of the way at the most when you're starting. That would be a whole lot for the worms to process and probably would end up turning anaerobic, which is not good. It is an aerobic process, which means it needs air.
Great. Thank you so much. So now we have a general question, maybe directed at Elchin or Angelica. I keep hearing that compost at the eco station isn't safe for food plants. Can you clarify?
So yes, the compost we have at the eco station is composted with biosolids. So therefore it's not recommended for food plants, food crops. So it's only recommended for like flowers or trees or different things where your fruits and vegetables are not resting on the soil.
Thank you for that clarification. Elchin, how well does this home biogas system work during the winter?
Typically during the winter time, I'm not using my system, and I'm not suggesting using my system because there's a temperature, right? So it works great when the ambient temperature is 60, 50, fine. Going below 50, not a good idea. So typically system go dormant during the winter time. So it's ideal starting late March all the way till late November. You can use it. But during winter time, unfortunately, unless there's also a way to put some sort of a heater. I purchased a heater, but I never used it. Just because I didn't want to consume electricity to heat it up. But you can do that. And if you can find a way to, like in my case, I put it in, I built a small greenhouse. I put inside a greenhouse. And then, if you install a heater, then it can run through the winter. But then you have to constantly use electricity in order to heat it up. So yeah, you can use it over the entire, during the whole 365 days. Or in my case, because I didn't want to use electricity, I just used it starting spring and then till the end of fall.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tiffany, how frequently do you need to water the worms?
So it depends on how wet or dry it was at your previous feeding, but typically a little bit. I use a spray bottle. You never want to dump water into a worm bin. The worms, because they absorb it through their skin, can actually puff up and die from drowning. So what you want to do is maintain a moisture level that's about the same as clothes when they come out of the rinse cycle, or that of a well wrung out sponge. So moist, but not enough that if you were to squeeze it, that any water would actually come out of the compost. So what I usually do is I will add new food to a bed, add some more bedding on top, and then use like a hand sprayer to spray down the top of the bedding at each feeding.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Angelica, we have another question for you. This one seems a little bit specific for this individual viewer. It reads, I had a tumbler several years. It's never gotten hot, and I'm sure it never will. So just waste in various states of decomposing. I'd say only suitable for rotating. I think they misspelled a word there. But I have no use for it. Is or will there be someplace it could go to use? So I believe this is a large tumbler that has had appropriate usage, but isn't being used currently.
You might want to offer it up on Keep It Local Los Alamos or one of the local websites where somebody might be interested in taking it off of your hands, giving it a whirl, so to speak.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Elchin, how long does it take to break down the food waste? How about bones?
Great question. So typically when you start a digester, you can imagine it takes some time, and it's typically 20 days, depending on the conditions. It can take shorter. Some guy in Arizona, it took him just 1 week. And in my case, it took me more than 3 weeks to start it. And to start it, you started with a horse manure. I did it with a horse manure. You can use cow manure, or you can buy, there is a package, startup package that comes, that you can buy separately. So there's 3 ways to start it. But once you start it, and once the bacteria start working, then, there is literally no time because you put your waste, it eats some of it it doesn't. And then, you put next day, you put more, and then it eats some of it doesn't. Some of the digestion might take longer, but it doesn't matter in this case, because every time when you feed it, it's gonna eat some of the old stuff, including some of the new stuff. So once it started, it's just start working, and there is no lag time. You just make sure that you don't overfeed it. The companies suggest up to 6 liters of waste that you can feed daily. And if you're using manure, then you can feed it up to 12 liters, which is, I don't know how many gallons is that, but I think it's 2.5 gallons. In terms of bones, you can feed bones, you can feed meat. It will digest that, no problem. But it will take longer time, but it will do it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Just a few more questions we're going to ask. Unfortunately, we won't get to all the questions tonight, but we're going to try to do our best to get through just a few more. So Tiffany, do you need to control the worm population in your compost bin?
No, worms are self-regulating, so they will continue to reproduce up until about 1 pound, which is 1,000 worms per square foot. So if they're outside, they'll just keep reproducing. If they're in a small space, they'll actually stop reproducing until their population regulates.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then Elchin, are there any dangers or precautions to be used to avoid gas buildup with the digester?
No, not at all. It might sound scary. We have a biogas, but it's actually not at all. The pressure that's created on a second compartment, that pressure is due to the sandbags, as I said, that are uniformly distributed, so that there is a pressure from all over the of that compartment, and that pressure is so low in comparison to the LPGs that we have. LPGs is a liquid gas, right? And it's a very high pressure. So if you start, if it's in fire, then it's going to blow up. This thing, even if the fire, you put it inside, and that place immediately cut the fire, they're going to be just poof, like that. It's not going to explode. It's not going to, do anything harmful. And then the other thing, like the lower back, the lower compartment is literally water, right? So even if there's going to be a fire around that thing, and it's going to burn the first chamber, then the water going to come out and help out to reduce the fire. So yeah, no, it doesn't. It's not harmful, and the gas, as I said, once it exceeds certain pressure, it will release that gas automatically.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Our final question for the evening: is there a way for me to begin composting if I live in an apartment or a space without a yard or outdoor area? I believe that question's directed at everyone.
I could answer that. So, and Tiffany can vouch for me because she helped take care of my worms once upon a time. Eco Station, I was really interested in starting to learn about vermicomposting. So we have a vermicomposting bin in our kitchen. And you would never know it. They don't stink at all. They're very quiet, and they're easy to be office mates with. So we just feed them all of our excess, banana wrapper, banana peels, and any greens that we accumulate at the Eco Station, we feed to them. And our bedding is shredded paper or sometimes leaves, and they're happy. I've had them for several years now. So that's what I would recommend for an apartment building. Tiffany, you might want to add to that.
I 100% agree. That's exactly what I would have said. And there's several different types of worm bins that are specifically made for indoor use. At the Eco Station, what they use is, I believe it's a 50-gallon that we updated. It's a little bit bigger, but it's a 50-gallon container with holes in the lid and on the sides. And that works great. Like Angelica had said, they've had it at the Eco Station for going on 5 years now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. A big thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to everyone who stopped in to watch tonight's program. We will be sending out an email shortly with a link to a survey you can take to let us know what you thought of tonight's program. And it will contain a little bit more information and some links to help you get started and do a little bit more information searching on composting. From Peak, thank you so much for stopping in tonight, and I hope everybody has an amazing evening.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks so much for organizing. Bye.